What up, Wizards? It's Dev, and did you know the World Championships are going on right now? For MTG, yeah, totally true, not lying to you, no marketing whatsoever. But give it a Google and see for yourself, do your own research. Right now we're in round 12 as I record this, so we're getting ready to wrap this whole burrito up soon. And once we do that, I might get around to doing a video about like what the best deck was and the best person playing the decks. We might look at the powerful stuff from this tournament meta in a different video, but you know me, what I really care about more than good Magic decks is it a spice. I really want to see what the best players in the world cooked up in the kitchen for the biggest tournament in the world. And this was the first World Championships in like objectively years, literally, that didn't disappoint on that front. We got a bunch of really cool looking new brews in this World Championship meta. I want to go over a few today, 5 specifically, plus an honorable mention. Then I'll go ahead and look at it real quick so we can get off this screen where there's like a stretched out image of an old school deck box from the World Championships. That can't be pleasant to look at. So let's look at the honorable mention. This time around, the honorable mention is a deck labeled Rakdos Burn by player Yuan Chen, and it looks really interesting, but it's also just kind of mono red aggro, and how interesting can that actually be, right? But I did want to take a look at this because it's got some interesting innovations, some new technologies, and blah, blah, blah. First of all, there's Godric Cloak Reveler. We have seen this a few times already in the few tournaments we've had access to in the early season for Wilds of Eldraine Standard. So it's not too wild to see this in a mono red aggro deck, but what is a little bit wild to see is this Callous Sellsword. This makes the deck Rakdos. It's the only black card in the main deck, like, period. And a lot of games you're not even going to cast, the non-red half of it. So, but I like the sort of line in this deck where you can go like Godric and then maybe get the celebration mode on him, turn him into a dragon and fire breathe, pump as much red mana as you have into him, save for 1 red mana, and then use that leftover red mana to just throw the Godric at your opponent. It seems like a cool play to have access to. You can do that with a Shivan Devastator too, This is dual purpose. You can kind of fill out an early slot in your curve with it if you absolutely have to. If you want to play the card wrong, you're not playing it wrong. It has that versatility, and I kind of like that about Devastator. If you need it to be a 3-drop, it's your 3-drop. But late in the game, if this is like a 5/5 or something, it's pretty good. A Callous Sellsword, swing in for 5 flying, and then hit them with the Sellsword, half of it. I think that's kind of neat. Aside from that, it's not straight up and down mono red aggro, but it does have some mono red aggro cards. I'm not going to lie to you. There's Monastery Swiftspear. You see it right here. We got Feldon in the deck. A whole 3 of, Phoenix Chick is in here as a 2 of. Bloodthirsty Adversary. It's the only one I say like that because I like for it to rhyme. Bloodthirsty Adversary. Actually looks really, really sweet in this deck with a couple of things, but that's kind of where the normal mono red stuff stops. I mean, there are 4 lightning strikes in the deck, but we'll get there. We're also playing a Furnace Reigns in here, which is kind of a threaten effect. Gain control of a creature till end of turn, untap it. It gains haste. Whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, create a treasure token, in case you wanted to know what the gravy on this particular threaten effect is. They're only playing 1, but I think this is a slick little slot to have in aggro right now. Grab their Shelly or something, like just whatever big duder they have over there. Maybe an Atraxa, swing over for 7 lifelink. Kind of negate the lifelink that they would have gained if they'd have blocked. It could really swing the game. I could see doing that. But this deck also plays, Kumano Phases Kakazan, Lightning Strike, and Play with Fire. Right, just a 1-up Play with Fire. That's to help make room for the Monstrous Rage in the deck. Really, really neat that there's 4 copies of this. Beginning of the season, we played a deck that had 4 Godric, 4 Monstrous Rage, and kind of a mono red shell. We did really, really well with that deck. And I was impressed by both Gotti and Rage. This is a great card. In this deck, you've got Bloodthirsty Adversary, which can come down off the top of your library. And for 5 mana, you're doing like 6 damage. If you just replay the Monstrous Rage out of your graveyard, You could just do that with a Lightning Strike, technically. But it's nice sometimes, I think, in the late game to have off the top of your library Adversary, kick it, put the counter on it. Monstrous Rage is +2/+0, plus the Monstrous rolls another 1. So, yeah, 3+2+1. is 6 trample damage, again, right off the top of your library. And just Rage is kind of good with every other creature in the deck, too. It makes Monastery Swiftspear like a 5-power trample for just 1 mana. So really, really sweet to see Rage in here. I do think it's a super playable card. There's also Urbra's Forge as just a 2 of, but this gives us both a late game plan, which I kind of like for a deck like this, obviously, and gives us a celebration thing, for Godric, because this puts the thing into play every single turn. So if we get a Forge token and we draw like a creature off the top of our library, or Monstrous Rage, by the way, which works with Godric in this way too, because it puts a roll token into play, then suddenly we're triggering celebration like pretty easily if we have a Forge in play. So I like that too, man. Just a sweet little deck here that can play, the Callous Sellsword, the creature half of it. But again, probably doesn't need to, like, most of the time. Like, it's a Rakdos deck, plays Rakdos lands, but still fits in 3 Mishra's Foundry because, like, come on, it's mono red. But I don't want to talk about this deck for too long, but I do want to point it out as, like, one of the cooler aggro decks in the entire field. But let's get into the actual list here with number 5, and this might look like the same deck because it's a Rakdos deck with Godric in it. But it's actually a very, very different deck, and it's good to see Oni Colt Anvil make an appearance on the World Championship stage, and never thought that our special little guy would get here. But here it is, man. There's a lot of cool stuff in this deck that I would not necessarily have expected to see, like the Godric, right? But you're playing 4 Urbra's Forge in the deck. It's pretty easy to make Godric like an ancillary damage plan to help you win the game. Kind of your big fat guy, He's your big flying guy that gets through for extra damage when your sacrifice plan isn't working. And Urbra's Forge really helps out not only your anvil, it doesn't make, I just want to be clear because I've messed this up before, it doesn't make artifact creatures, even though it really, really should. It doesn't, but it is itself an artifact, which I think is kind of nice. But, just the same like late game plan that also has the ability to bust it open with Godric as the last Rakdos deck that we saw. But that's kind of where the similarities end a little bit. This is a sacrifice deck, all things considered. It's got Annihilating Glare. I don't know why it shows this image, like an art card here. What Annihilating Glare is like 1 black mana, and you either pay 4 to cast it, like an extra 4 mana, or you sacrifice an artifact or creature, and it's the text is destroy target creature or planeswalker. So it's one of these, bone splinters kind of effect, sort of, for just a single black mana. So again, sacrifice deck, but it's got some of the stuff you might expect in an anvil deck, like Experimental Synthesizer is in here, Urbra's Forge we've already talked about, Epicure is in here, Bloodtithe Harvester, the creatures that make blood tokens, all that makes sense. But there's also of Vran. There's 2 copies of Vran in here, like the Super Blood Artist. That's a legendary creature. This guy's in the deck. I'm really happy about that. Like, even though I don't really expect this deck to have done super well by the time the smoke settles and the dust clears, I still got to rep my dude, man. Like, I got to put this deck on my list somewhere. Number 5 is appropriate, I think. So again, I don't think it's the most powerful thing in the world, but anytime I see Vran on a deck, like, I get a little excited. But it's also Sir Ginger. Really, really cool in an anvil deck. If there's anything that's going to make the anvil deck like actually good now, it's probably this card. There's not a whole lot of other like brand new stuff in this deck aside from the Godric, whatever. So even though the Godric is pretty hot, it also works with anvil. I should point out that like celebration stuff like Godric, pretty good with anvil because it's going to put, a token into play every turn too. So not bad. Usually you're going to tap the anvil on your turn anyway, so not bad. But Sir Ginger works really well in kind of an eggs deck where you're breaking a lot of artifacts and tokens that are artifacts. So Ginger gets big. She's also a way to kind of get through in the late game along with Godric. So I like that about it. Deck really has more dimension than it had before in a couple of ways, that it needed. It kind of needed like a big, effective and efficient. That's the word I'm looking for. Efficiently costed, artifact creature. It needed to be an artifact. It needed to go big. I think Ginger's really, really good at that. So really like the addition to the deck here. And there are some other cards. I'm not going to lie to you. There's Kamana Faces Kakazan. There's Torch the Tower, another sort of brand new card in the deck. This is the bargain effect that's on a magma spray. That's what it is. Not magma jet, I believe. No. Is it Magma Jet? Maybe it's spray. Whatever. It's the 1 red mana spell at instant speed that exiles a thing when it hits and only does a couple of damage. But this one, you're able to hit for more damage. You can scry if you bargain it. Just a really cool thing in a deck that's looking to play a card like this. It's traditionally played a Voltage Surge, but I could see how this is a much better call, especially with, the need to exile certain creatures in this environment. Tenacious Underdog, Mosswood Dread Knight, and blah, blah. And Dread Knight is seeing a lot of play. One of the most represented archetypes in this tournament is Golgari midrange, so, which, by the way, is probably a decent matchup against this deck. So Torch the Tower is really nice to have against the Dread Knights and the occasional underdogs and stuff. because they're going to tear you up with Terra Sunders and whatever, But I guess you have so many artifacts, they can't remove them all, right? No matter how many Besajus and Terra Sunders they draw, they might have problems. But either way, I just thought this was a neat little deck. And again, it's just really cool to see Oni Cult, so it's going to be on my list. But let's look at number 4. This is the legendary Shota Yasuoka, who is probably going to be on my list no matter what deck he's playing, right? I'm a Shota stan. We respect and love Shota in this dojo. So in case you don't know who Shota Yasuoka is, he's just one of the best Magic players of all time. He always marches to the beat of his own drum. He is one of the more off-meta players in the history of Magic. He tends to do pretty well, and he does funky stuff. This time's no different. This is labeled Demir Fairies. That's what this deck. He wants you to believe this is a Fairies deck, even though we're looking at 3 copies of Sheldred right now, and 2 Graveyard Trespassers. What? But after that, it is a Fairies deck, I promise. There's 2 copies of Picklock Prankster in this deck. Made it all the way to the big stage. It's nice to see. I really like this card, but it's also Fairy Mastermind in here, which for some reason brings up Rona. That's a weird thing to do. This is like Magic's official site, too. There's a bunch of weird screw-ups already in this video. It's so strange, but I shouldn't be too surprised. But yeah, what Fairy Mastermind actually is, you probably know this, but it's the 2-mana flash, 2/1 fairy that whenever your opponent draws their second card of the turn, you can draw a card. It also has an activated ability that allows you to both draw a card. So it's that thing. That's the thing they're using. There's also 4 Sleep Cursed Fairy. Hey, that's the actual image of the actual card it's meant to represent. Nice. This is just the 1-mana 3/3 flying ward 2 that comes into play with 3 stun counters on it. You can pay 2 to untap it. And it takes a few activations to untap it, or a few turns or whatever. So cool card. It's mostly meant to activate, like turn on stuff like Ego Drain and Spell Stutter in this deck. Spell Stutter is the Fairy Mana Leak. Ego Drain is the Fairy Thoughtseize. You've probably seen these over the course of previous seasons. So it's also Kaito Shizuki. So we're not necessarily a straight up and down Fairies deck. We have like 10 Fairies in the deck. And aside from that, we're sort of a hybrid like Typal, like the Fairies deck, mixed with like a blue-black mid-range deck that plays the Sheldreds, the Graveyard Trespassers, the Kaitos, the removal, and all that. We've even got a copy of Ice Out in here, the 3-mana counterspell that costs 1 less if it's bargained, which is really interesting because there's not a whole lot in here that you can bargain off of, right? It's Kaito Shizuki. He makes a token. Is there like anything else? I've looked at all these decks before I came here, but yeah, that's basically it. Interesting. I guess you just want a hard counter in this deck. I'm probably missing something. I probably am. But either way, we've got Siphon Insight, Negate, the 4 Go for the Throats, 2 cut downs. So again, the removal suite, some of the counter spells that you're used to, along with the Fairy counterspell, the Fairy Thoughtseize, and just enough fairies to enable it. But you may notice that this is labeled actually Soul Tie Fairies. Let me go. I think I said Demir Fairies. No, Soul Tie Fairy. How is it Soul Tie? There's not a single green mana symbol in the entire deck. What's that about? Okay. So if you haven't spotted it yet, there's a Restless Cottage in this mana base. Because Shota is a crazy person. He really does whatever he wants. Restless Cottage and all the green lands and stuff are in here. And the green lands are here just to activate this card. That is it. That's all it does, is just be a creature land. I assume that in the later game, or maybe after sweepers or board resets, or you're fighting it out in the trenches, or they've killed all your flyers, there's probably a bunch of like war of attrition or, low board state situations on turn 7 or whatever, where this card is actually really, really good to help you like finish the game off or help you win the damage race because it makes the food tokens. So, this makes tokens too. I see what you're doing. See, I guess you can bargain the food token for Ice Out. That's, man, achievement unlocked if you're able to do that. Just what a weird way to build fairies, but you always have to respect what Shota's doing. I just really like that he had the stones to be like, okay, it's Demir Fairies with Sheldred. Okay, you gotta have, and Kaito's in here too, sure, and then also Restless Cottage for no reason. But he does have a darn good reason. Darn good reason. Who says darn? Who actually says darn in their real life? I hate YouTube. Hate the algorithm. But in any case, the filters for language and stuff. Anyway, Restless Cottage is in here. What a pick. Man, I want to try this so bad. Now we're at number 3 or something. Yeah, that's what it is. Let's look at Marco Vassallo's 5-color reanimator deck. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this. You know reanimator decks, and there were a bunch at the event. Mostly Rakdos reanimator, which kind of made a comeback. It's still a deck even without Fable of the Mirror Breakers. So interesting that I think it's actually kind of interesting that deck was so well represented. But you had one lone person over here playing 5-color reanimator with some pretty kind of actually interesting stuff. You know, you got your Cruelty of Gix, you got your Atraxa, so not like too surprising there. But you've also got Corpse Appraiser, like this is just a Grixis deck minding its own business. Bloodtide Harvester too, so just like leftovers from Grixis. Like they just had the Grixis deck put together, like, oh, it's throwing Atraxa, sure. You know, but there's also Wandering Mind. It doesn't even find, well, it does. It's non-creature, non-land. It does find like Cruelty of Gix. But you've also got Celestis in here to throw like Atraxa into your graveyard, along with the whole card, the card that got this deck featured in this video. Collector's Vault. This deck is yet another. This is the second deck in the season so far that's actually playing Collector's Vault. I'm so proud of it. This is the 2-mana artifact from Wilds of Eldraine. You pay 2, you tap it, you draw a card, discard a card, create a treasure token. So this is doing a Fable of the Mirror Breaker impression in some reanimator decks and stuff this season. Some bargain decks as well. Decks play bargain cards. We'll sometimes play those. So just weird. It looks like a weird inclusion, but you get it down on turn 2. You activate it on turn 3. Drop the Atraxa, draw a card, make a treasure token, and then ramp into the turn 4 Cruelty of Gix, right? So there's a pretty obvious line with it right there. It's just kind of self-contained. The ramp and the binning and the helping you draw into the Cruelty, like all in the same card. So obviously it's pretty sweet. And if you know, I don't know if this deck's playing anything bargain. I don't think that it is, but in the decks that do play it as like a bargain enabler, it can bargain, or you can bargain the treasure token, which I think is really sweet. So, but other stuff in the deck is just removal. You know, the deck plays Void Wren. This is, I believe, aside from the Atraxa, the white card in the deck, basically. So it's kind of neat. But there's also Go for the Throat. You might expect that. Make Despair. You might expect that. Cut Down. You might expect that. You know. So, and then the sideboard is mostly like removal and stuff. There's weird stuff. There's like an Obnixilis the Adversary. There's a Desert Betrayer of Flesh, which I guess makes your Collector's Vault and your Celestis free and almost free, respectively. So there's a Toxrill the Corrosive if you want to, reanimate that. Interesting sideboard here. But for the most part, it's just removal. But I thought this was the coolest of the Reanimator decks, and there were a lot of decks on Reanimator. Like the 2 most popular decks of the format, in the tournament meta at least, spoiler alert, were like a sort of Atraxa ramp deck and an Atraxa Reanimator deck. So you're just trying to Atraxa on like turn 4. No matter what deck you are, you're attempting to Atraxa on turn 4. For the ramp decks, it's often Atraxa on 5, right? Because they go like Invasion of Ixalan into Atraxa on the next turn. But we saw domain ramp decks. We just saw like more straight up and down Atraxa ramp decks. And then we saw these Reanimator decks. So Atraxa may be the most popular card in the tournament, but that's hard to say. Esper is actually far and away, again, spoiler alert, the most represented archetype in the format. And at time of recording, again, we're in round 12, there were 3 Esper decks in the top 16, which is actually not as good as I think a lot of people would have expected them to perform, which is kind of good news, to be honest. in any case, this was my favorite of all the Atraxa decks in the whole field here, mostly because of the Collector's Vault. Just a really, really neat inclusion here. We're at number 2 already, man. We've been having a lot of fun here, at least I have. We're going to look at Azorius Tokens by Alexander Hain. It doesn't sound super exciting, Azorius or tokens, I think, to a lot of people, but I think this is a neat little deck, man. It plays 4 Regal Bunnycorn. I did not necessarily expect for the Regal Bunnycorn deck that showed up at the World Championships to be blue-white. I've seen the Mardu one with Calicel Sword. I've seen the black-white one. I've built the green-white one. We did a whole deck tech on that one. So I've seen the Boros one with like Rabid Battery and stuff. Like there's a lot of Regal Bunnycorn decks out there. Yet to see blue-white, but here we are. Regal Bunnycorn, PT equal to the number of non-land permanents you control, so you got to get a bunch of those. How do you do it? Well, there's Invasion of New Phyrexia in this deck. Really neat card in case you haven't seen this in a while, and I know you have because I keep getting people in my comment section like, man, I've been playing Azorius Knights. It's pretty dope. But this is, 2 mana and X for a 6 whatever you call it, siege loyalty, siege, 6 health siege. And when it ETBs, you create X 2/2 white and blue knight creature tokens with vigilance. It flips over into a Teferi that can anthem effect your knights and stuff. So really, really interesting card here. And it plays well with Invasion of Segovia, which also plays well with Regal Bunnycorn. Like Invasion of Segovia is the 3 mana battle. It's got 4 HP, whatever. When it ETBs, you get 2 1/1 blue Kraken creature tokens with trample. And then when it flips over, you get this 3/3 guy that lets all your non-creature spells have Convoke. And then at the end of the turn, you untap like up to 4 creatures. So really, really neat in this deck, you know, for a few reasons. What you can do is say turn 2 Bunnycorn, and then it's a funny thing to say, and then turn 3 Invasion. And Bunnycorn's going to be like a 4/4. Yeah, itself, the 2 tokens, and Invasion itself. So Bunnycorn's a 4/4, and it can swing into Invasion to flip it over that turn on an empty board. So that's a neat little play line right there. And there are ways to like flip over Invasion, right? Like if you did that, if you Invasion and flip it over on turn 3, then on turn 4, you can use the Convoke ability on the 3/3 Invasion, the other side of it, to like Invasion of New Phyrexia for like X equals 4 or something, like pretty easily, maybe even X equals 6. Yeah, you've got a total of 8 mana, so you can X equals 6 like pretty easily in that situation. And that's also like really gross. Like there's some pretty ridiculous turn 4 lines that you don't even really see in this deck. And if you go Bunnycorn and Segovia on 2 and 3 respectively, like it sets a lot of stuff up. So much stuff up. So a neat little deck here. It's also got an Eater of Virtue in it. Kind of neat. Virtue of Loyalty is in here. Obviously works well with all your tokens. Wedding Announcement makes tokens. You know, all that makes sense. So there's a lot of stuff in this deck that just makes sense. There's also Destroy Evil, Make Disappear, Spell Pierce, Protect the Negotiators, sort of counter spell suite, removal suite in here. Not as much removal as you might expect in the main deck, at least. You know, there's a little bit more in the sideboard, although not that much when you really look at it. But this deck wants to both dominate in terms of board presence and just not really care what creatures you have out, while also just creating these like pretty gnarly lines in the relatively early games. So sweet deck that just has good cards in it too. You know, you got your Adeline, you got your Fairy Mastermind. You kind of play at instant speed for the first couple of turns of the game. Do I want to remove that guy? Do I want to counter that spell with Make Disappear or something? Do I want to get down Fairy Mastermind? Or should I pull the trigger and play more sorcery speed, kind of aggro, Regal Bunnycorn on turn 2 because I'm on the play into the turn 3 Invasion? There's a lot of like lines in this deck. And it plays like pretty versatilely. At least it looks as though it's got a lot of versatility on its side. And again, just good cards. You know, 4 Wandering Emperors, 2 Adelines, just good cards. So I like the way it looks, man. Men's Warehouse. I like the way it looks. So Azorius tokens may not seem like the most snappy deck in the world, but this one has a bunch of like new cards and cards that haven't been able to really see a lot of play yet. And I think that's cool. You know, when you get the best of both worlds, like sleeper cards that haven't really had their moment in standard, along with brand new stuff that facilitates them. Like, yeah, it's delicious. So definitely my number 2 deck. Now, the number 1 deck we're going to look at today, Cauldron deck. Now, these are actually kind of real right now. The Simic Cauldron deck, not the one we're looking at right now, but the Simic Cauldron deck is in the top 8 in round 12. So that deck is infinite mana in standard, with like Kami of Whispered Hopes or whatever it's called, like that. It works and it's real and it's happening right now in the top 8 of the World Champ, the biggest tournament of the year. So that's cool. But what are we looking at here? Well, it's a deck that 3 different players, at least that I saw, registered. It's Mono Blue Cauldron. This is a variant I hadn't seen just yet. All right, so this one is a weird one, and it's probably going to take the longest time to explain, but I think at this point a lot of people know what Soul Cauldron does. The important ability is tap to exile a card from your graveyard. When a creature card's exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Now, if you have any creatures with +1/+1 counters on them, they have all the activated abilities of all the things that you've exiled with the Soul Cauldron up to that point. This is really, really neat, and does a bunch of crazy stuff in standard. But what this mostly does in this deck is attempt infinite mana. And you can also sort of infinitely get through the cards in your deck. If you either have or exile, remember, you don't have to actually have any of these cards in play. You just have to have exiled them with the Soul Cauldron and have creatures with +1/+1 counters on them, which is easy because the Soul Cauldron does that. But Sleep Curse Fairy can untap itself. So anything with this ability can untap itself. So let's say you have Omen Hawker, which taps to make 2 mana, but you can only spend that to use activated abilities, right? So if you tap it for 2 mana and then pay 2 mana to untap it, because it has Sleep Cursed Fae's ability, or maybe you have a Sleep Cursed Fae and an Omen Hawker in the graveyard. That works too. You can use the untap ability on Sleep Cursed Fae to untap it. But then you can tap it for 2 mana and use that mana to untap it. So that's infinite untaps, but let's say that we also have a Training Grounds in play. Now, this is just it just got reprinted in like March the Machine Aftermath. This is a single blue mana for an enchantment. Activated abilities, creatures you control cost up to 2 less to activate. So if we have a Training Grounds in play plus the combo I was just talking about, Soul Cauldron plus Sleep Cursed Fae, Omen Hawker, or any creatures that have their abilities for whatever, because they have counters on them. Then suddenly it costs, a mana less to activate Sleep Cursed Fairies ability. All right. So that means that we're actually generating mana when we do the loop. When we untap it and then tap it. And we untap it, tap it for mana. Untap it with its ability, tap it for mana. Use that mana to untap it. We're generating 1 mana in each loop now. So that means that we can use Hypnotic Grifter to connive and draw into whatever we want to draw into. Rona, we can just tap, draw it, discard a card, untap it, draw, discard a card, untap it, draw, discard a card. Or again, any creature that we have in play can have any of these abilities. So any creature that we have in play can have this Rona looting ability, can have the Hypnotic Grifter, ability to draw your entire deck. Because again, you're generating infinite mana. You don't care about the 3 mana activated ability. You have infinite mana at this point. So you can draw your deck until you hit Realm Scorcher Hellkite. And I guess you can put it into play, but you're not going to do that like 10 times out of 10. You're just going to drop it into your graveyard and then Agatha Soul Cauldron it away. And that way, all of your dudes have its activated ability that allow you to deal damage to any target. Now, the other thing that Soul Cauldron does is make it so that you can spend mana of any color to activate the activated abilities of creatures you control. So if Realm Scorcher Hellkite's in your graveyard and you get rid of it with Agatha Soul Cauldron, all of your +1/+1 counter guys will have this ability and they can spend any color mana to use it. So if you're generating infinite mana, you have now rolled that into infinite damage if you've exiled a Hellkite with the Agatha Soul Cauldron. So just, again, a lot of moving parts, and you would think that a deck like this just wouldn't work, but it turns out that it absolutely does. It does have, Make Disappear and Spell Pierce to help, protect the combo, keep the opponent from doing important stuff. It's got Witness Protection. Good to see this thing on the big stage. Not the only deck playing this card, by the way, which I really like to see. You guys know I love Witness Protection. But, it's got Consider to draw into the combo as well and put things into the graveyard if you want to. Sleight of Hand, same thing, put things into the graveyard. Now, since we have 8 of these 1 mana, filter and draw card effects, and since our curve is actually extremely low, look at all these 1 mana guys. Look at, Agatha Soul Cauldron only costs 2. So our curve actually stops at 2. We'll never cast the Hellkite. So our curve stops at 2. It allows us to play 19 lands. There's only 19 lands in this deck, and 2 of them are legendary. So you don't really care if you have to throw one of them away, right? Extremely, extremely low curve, allowing us to play all of the cards we want to play. And then there's also Surge Engine. I haven't brought this one up yet either. Again, we can draw our entire deck with this one because the final ability is 6 mana. Draw 3 cards, right? We can also just activate it endlessly. Again, this ability can be on any or all of our creatures. So we can spend as much mana as we want to activate it the first time and then activate it the second time. We can do that to all of our creatures and suddenly they are 5 power unblockable guys. Actually 6 power unblockable guys because they have +1/+1 counters on them. So usually just 3 guys and you can kill your opponent. Just with Surge Engine's activated abilities being on all of your dudes. So just this deck is so ridiculous, and I love it. I love it so much. And right now I think Simic Cauldron is the one doing the bigger and better things, but I still really love the way this deck looks. It sucks that Agatha Soul Cauldron is $40 right now because outside of that one card, the entire deck is really, really budget and plays a bunch of cards that don't get to see enough play because they're not good. Hypnotic Grifter is just not a good Magic card. It's a scam. It's a grift. But in this deck, you know, Rona, Surge Engine, Omen Hawker, all these cards that we wanted to do something when they came out, they get to do something thanks to the weirdest card in Wilds of Eldraine. So, Training Grounds even gets a spot in Standard. Like, the deck is so neat, dude. So I really, really like this thing. I wanted to show it off. It's a little bit different than the other Soul Cauldron decks that we've already seen to death in this Standard. Just really neat stuff that uses a lot of wonky, weird cards that are finally getting a moment to shine. So I want to play this very bad. There's a deck from this tournament that I want to play the most. It is this one. That's all I've got for this one. There were a bunch of new and returning, I guess you'd say, decks at this tournament. I've already mentioned like Rakdos Reanimator, but there was like Bant Up the Beanstalk. Up the Beanstalk is a huge card at this tournament, right? And has been good most of the season so far, but these sort of Atraxa ramp or domain ramp lists that run like Up the Beanstalk along with like Leyline Binding and Sunfall, which also procs the Up the Beanstalk. So Sunfall, draw a card, get a guy. It's ridiculous. They play like Chrome Host Seed Shark because its interaction with Sunfall is also neat, but Chrome Host plus Up the Beanstalk means that you're like drawing cards and getting guys, creating all this value. So like Bant Beanstalk was a cool deck. These domain Beanstalk decks, they look awesome and they're here, but I just couldn't cover all of the kind of cool new decks over the day because we'd be here all day and we kind of already have been. So I hope you enjoyed the content. There was a lot of really cool new stuff. I went nuts when I saw like how many new decks there actually were at the World Championships. I didn't expect much and I got way, way more than I ever hoped for. So, you know, is Standard saved? Standard's looking pretty neat, you know, healthy. There's a lot of different archetypes that are heavily represented, along with like a pretty good percentage of other decks, you know, like 10% other percentage. So a lot of neat stuff being tried at the World Championships, and that is something that you actually don't often see. So just let me know how you felt about everything, what your favorite decks on the day are, and what you want to try out and all that. How do you feel about Standard going in to, you know, the next month or two before the Ixalan set comes out? So just let me know how you feel about everything and do the YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Check out the Patreon, link in the description for that. $1 a month. You can vote on what decks we do around here. We're about to do like Black-White Token Reanimator. The patrons are really excited about that. So if you want to help vote on stuff, link in the description to the Patreon, just $1 a month. Check me out on Twitch where we stream bad decks mostly and sometimes do okay with them. So again, link in the description for all the pertinent stuff, plus a bunch of videos that we've done this season, including the Bunnies Deck Tech, which you should watch because nobody else did. But anyway, that's all I got for now. Just hit me up in the comments section. It's your go, you know, but that's basically it for me. I'm Doug from The Place, and I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.